a billion-dollar promise to revolutionize the family car. More space, radical style, and the future of American design. Chrysler bet everything on the cab-forward idea, dazzling showrooms and experts alike. But within a decade, the dream crumbled. Deadly safety flaws, nightmarish repairs, and buyers recoiling from what was supposed to be progress. What turned this overnight sensation into an engineering cautionary tale? The full story is far stranger than it first appears. Cab-forward design flips the familiar car silhouette on its head. Instead of a long hood stretching out in front, the passenger cabin sits far forward, so far that the front wheels are nearly tucked under the dashboard. The cowl, that dividing line between engine bay and passenger space, moves up and over the front axle, pushing the windshield and driver right to the edge of the car's footprint. This is not just a styling trick. By moving the wheels out toward the corners and shortening the nose, designers squeeze out every inch of usable cabin space within the same overall length as a traditional sedan. The result is a car that looks almost futuristic, with a sharply sloped windshield and a hood that seems almost like an afterthought. On paper, the math is straightforward. A typical mid-size sedan of the early 1990s, think Ford Taurus or Toyota Camry, dedicated a good chunk of its length to the hood and engine bay, with the front axle set well behind the front bumper. Cab-forward cars like the Dodge Intrepid or Chrysler Concorde turned that formula inside out. Their wheelbase stretched as much as 113 inches, matching or beating larger rivals, but the overall length stayed around 194 inches. That allowed for limousine-like rear legroom and a wide, airy cabin, all without making the car any harder to park or maneuver. This new stance gave the cars a planted, almost aggressive look. The wheels pushed out to the corners promised better handling, while the steeply raked windshield and short overhangs cut through the air more efficiently. The effect was so dramatic that even parked next to their competition, cab-forward sedans looked like they had arrived from a decade in the future. For Chrysler's design and engineering teams, this was more than a styling exercise. It was a wholesale rethinking of how to package a family car. The traditional long hood, short cabin look was out. Maximum space and modern proportions were in. Chrysler didn't just sketch out a bold new look and hope for the best. They put nearly $1 billion on the line to make cab-forward a reality. The LH platform, those Intrepid, Concorde, and Vision sedans, became the most expensive gamble in Chrysler's history since the minivan. The company's future, still shaky after a decade of financial troubles, was riding on this move. Two men pushed the idea from wild concept to production reality: Tom Gale, head of design, and Francois Castaing, the engineering chief. Gale wanted to break free from the bland boxes and jelly beans filling American roads, chasing a vision of space and style that felt miles ahead of the competition. Castaing, meanwhile, was obsessed with squeezing every inch of efficiency and handling from the new layout, even if it meant rewriting the rulebook on how a sedan should be built. The commitment was total. Chrysler's board approved the billion-dollar budget in the early 1990s, greenlighting new assembly lines, custom tooling, and a dedicated plant in Brampton, Ontario. Every major component, the chassis, the engine, the suspension, was reworked or built from scratch to fit the new proportions. Nothing about the LH platform was off the shelf. The company even invested in advanced computer-aided design systems, a rarity at the time, to manage the complex geometry of the cab-forward shape. Gale and Castaing's teams worked around the clock, sometimes sleeping at the plant, as deadlines loomed. The pressure was enormous. Chrysler needed a hit, and the entire industry was watching. If the cab-forward sedans flopped, it would not just be an embarrassment, it could sink the company. With nearly $1 billion spent and reputations on the line, there was no turning back. The only way out was through, and every engineer and designer knew it. Crowds packed the Chrysler stand at the 1992 Detroit Auto Show, drawn by the sharp lines and futuristic stance of the new LH sedans. The Dodge Intrepid, in particular, became the talk of the show. Reviewers praised its wide, airy cabin and aggressive silhouette. The press called Chrysler's move bold, even visionary. Motor Trend named the Intrepid Car of the Year for 1993, a rare feat for a domestic sedan at the time. Headlines touted the arrival of a new American design language, one that seemed to leapfrog the stage shapes coming out of Japan and Detroit alike. Showrooms buzzed with excitement as the first LH models rolled out. Buyers lined up for test drives, and dealers reported brisk sales from the start. By the end of 1993, Chrysler's LH cars had moved 400,000 units, with the Intrepid alone accounting for nearly half that total. The Concorde and Eagle Vision followed, each drawing their own crowds with promises of limousine-like space and a driving experience that felt more European than anything Chrysler had built before. Industry analysts took notice. For a company that had spent years on the brink, Chrysler suddenly looked like it had cracked the code. The cab-forward sedans drew buyers who wanted something different, something that felt like it belonged in the next decade, not the last. The design's impact rippled through car magazines, awards ceremonies, and even rival automakers, who scrambled to figure out if they had missed the next big thing. For a brief moment, Chrysler's gamble looked like a masterstroke. The company's image, battered by years of bland products and financial struggles, was suddenly infused with optimism. The LH sedans were not just selling, they were winning over critics, customers, and the industry itself. Crash test data from the early 1990s told a story that no amount of marketing could spin. The cab-forward LH sedans, with their short sloping hoods and forward-canted cabins, offered up to 20% less front-end structure compared to rivals like the Camry or Taurus. That missing metal meant energy from a front-end collision had nowhere to go, but straight into the passenger compartment. NHTSA and IIHS tests revealed the consequences. Forces measured at the firewall were 30 to 50% higher than in sedans with longer crumple zones. Instead of crumpling and absorbing the blow, the structure transferred it directly to the feet and legs of anyone inside. Engineers inside Chrysler scrambled to reinforce the rails and firewall after early crash simulations showed alarming spikes in head injury criteria and chest deceleration. But there was only so much they could do within the tight packaging. The A-pillars and cowl, pushed forward to create that signature cab-forward look, now had to double as structural shields. In moderate overlap crashes, the footwell would buckle inward by as much as 25 to 31 centimeters, crushing space that was supposed to protect the driver's legs. The 2000 LHS recorded a HIC 15 score of 739, well above the threshold for serious injury, while the airbag deployed too late to prevent hard contact with the steering wheel. Even after a redesign, the best Chrysler could manage was an acceptable rating, still trailing the good scores of its competitors. For buyers, these numbers were not buried in technical reports. They showed up in insurance premiums and safety ratings published in every major car magazine. The promise of more space and style came at a cost, a fundamental compromise in crash protection. Engineers knew it, insurers knew it, and soon, the buying public began to realize it too. The very proportions that made the cab-forward cars look so futuristic had quietly undermined the most basic expectation anyone has when stepping into a family sedan: survival. In a serious crash, engineers squeezed every millimeter of space from the cab-forward layout, but the victory on paper became a nightmare under the hood. By shrinking the engine bay nearly 10% compared to conventional sedans, Chrysler's LH cars forced critical components into a mechanical dogpile. The radiator, fans, intake manifold, And even the heater tubes were stacked so tightly that airflow suffered from the start. Early prototypes overheated during desert testing, with coolant temperatures spiking 20 degrees above target. Technicians traced the issue to the cramped nose. There simply was not enough room for a large radiator or for heat to escape once the car was in motion. Dealership mechanics felt the squeeze in their knuckles and in their schedules. What should have been a routine job, like changing spark plugs or swapping a water pump, now required hours of disassembly. On the 3.5-liter V6, the heater tube snaked underneath the intake manifold, so a leaky O-ring meant tearing down half the top end of the engine. Swapping out a water pump or timing chain demanded special tools and extra labor, sometimes doubling the time listed in the service manual. Mechanics joked that you needed the hands of a child and the patience of a saint to work on these cars. Warranty claims began to climb. From 1993 to 1996, Chrysler's own data showed a 20% jump in cooling and electrical complaints on LH models compared to their older sedans. Owners reported oil sludge and premature bearing failures, often traced back to chronic overheating and the engine bay's inability to shed heat. Even the most careful maintenance could not save engines from the effects of hot, stagnant air and tightly packed hoses. Forums filled with stories of failed water pumps, seized alternators, and oil-caked engine blocks, symptoms of a design that left no margin for error. For drivers, the impact was subtle at first. A warning light here, a fan running longer than usual. But for the people fixing these cars, the cab-forward layout turned every repair into a puzzle. And every extra hour spent in the shop meant higher bills for owners and rising costs for Chrysler. The promise of futuristic space came with a very real price in the engine bay, setting the stage for the next round of headaches when those tightly packed parts met even a minor fender bender. A minor fender bender in a cab-forward Chrysler could empty a wallet faster than a major crash in a rival sedan. On a conventional car, a low-speed front-end tap might mean a few $100s for a new bumper and some paint. But on the LH sedans, the same accident often required full subframe or frame rail replacements, repairs that ballooned to $3,000, $4,000, sometimes even $5,000. Insurance adjusters flagged these cars as high risk. By 1995, average front-end repair bills for cab-forward models ran 25 to 50% higher than for a Ford Taurus or a Toyota Camry. Premiums followed suit, rising up to 20% for owners, while resale values slipped away. An intrepid owner with a $1,200 bump could find themselves staring at a $4,500 invoice, thanks to the way the short, integrated nose transferred even minor impacts deep into the car's structure. The economic pain didn't stop at the body shop. The cab-forward layout's signature windshield rake, angled back at nearly 50 degrees, created a new kind of headache behind the wheel. To achieve that dramatic futuristic shape, designers had to thicken and stretch the A-pillars, the vertical supports that flank the windshield. Instead of opening up the driver's view, the result was a 30% increase in blind spots compared to traditional sedans. Focus group drivers complained about losing sight of cross-traffic, cyclists, even pedestrians at intersections. Safety regulators took note, but no fix could shrink the pillars without sacrificing the very rigidity needed for crash protection. For owners, these weren't abstract engineering quirks. They were daily frustrations and real financial hits. A car that looked like the future on the showroom floor quickly felt compromised in the parking lot, at the body shop, and every time a driver had to crane their neck to see around a corner. The promise of cab-forward innovation faded as the costs, both literal and figurative, kept piling up. Focus group rooms filled with frustration and confusion. Drivers described the cab-forward Chryslers as weird, unsafe, and cheap, words that stuck like glue to the brand's once bold image. One participant said it just looks off, and that they did not trust it. Another said it was the kind of car you end up with as a rental. These were not outliers. Internal surveys from Chrysler's own research in 1994 showed that 60% of respondents had a negative impression of the cab-forward design. Instead of futuristic, buyers saw awkward proportions and questioned whether safety had been traded away for style. The numbers followed the mood. After the early sales rush, interest began to cool. By 1997, sales of the LH sedans had dropped by 40% compared to their peak just a few years earlier. Dealerships struggled to move inventory, even as incentives piled up. Owners complained about high repair bills and nagging doubts about crash safety. But it was the daily experience, the thick blind spots, the odd looks from neighbors, and the sense that something fundamental was missing that really drove people away. The promise of a new era in car design faded into a reputation for being out of step with what buyers wanted. For every award on the showroom wall, there seemed to be twice as many skeptical voices in the parking lot. The trust was gone, and with it, the momentum that once made cab forward seem unstoppable. By the late 1990s, the American car market was shifting beneath Chrysler's feet. Sedans, once the backbone of every automaker's lineup, were losing ground fast. In 1990, sedans made up nearly half of all new vehicles sold in the U.S. Within a decade, that number had dropped to just 30%, as buyers flocked to sport utility vehicles in record numbers. Models like the Jeep Grand Cherokee, which topped 300,000 sales a year by 1995, proved that drivers wanted height, utility, and a sense of safety more than a futuristic sedan with extra legroom. For Chrysler, the timing could not have been worse. Billions had been sunk into the LH platform, but the cab-forward sedans could not ride the sport utility vehicle wave. Their unique structure made them impossible to adapt for trucks or crossovers. Every car that rolled off the Brampton line carried a hidden penalty. Specialized tooling and low parts interchangeability pushed per-unit costs up by as much as 20% compared to more flexible platforms. While competitors could spread expenses across sedans, wagons, and sport utility vehicles, Chrysler's cab-forward bet was locked in a shrinking market. By 2004, the numbers told the story. Sedan share had crashed to 25%, while sport utility vehicles and trucks made up more than half of all new vehicles. LH sedans faded from showrooms as Chrysler quietly phased out the platform, replaced by the rear-drive LX cars that returned to traditional proportions. The cab-forward shape, once billed as the future, slipped away with barely a headline. Buyers had moved on, and so had the industry. Car design still promises bold solutions, but the market punishes ideas disconnected from what drivers truly value. Today, safety regulations and consumer preferences drive every curve and proportion you see on the road. Innovation survives only when it aligns with real-world priorities, not just engineering ambition. In a world of rapid change, asking what people actually want remains the only blueprint that endures. What is your take on design versus reality?